Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar tonight, What's New at Landmark Cases. I'm Kathy Ruffing. I'm Street Law's Senior Director for Teacher Professional Development Programs and Curriculum. And I have with me tonight Ben Marks, who is our Communications Coordinator and worked really hard at uploading all of the files into Landmark Cases and doing a lot of work on the website itself. There's Ben. Ben will be here to take questions about anything technically that I can't answer, which is pretty much everything technical. We also have BK with us tonight. BK is driving our bus tonight and will be working the technology behind the scenes. So that's our crew tonight. I'm very, very excited to walk you through and be your tour guide on this guided tour of Landmark Cases. We've been working on the upgrades to this site for the better part of a year, and we're super excited to share with you the updates that we're really proud of. I'd be remiss not to begin this presentation without thanking the Supreme Court Historical Society, without whose generous grant we would not have these amazing updates and additions, and also their trustees and program committee members who reviewed the content for both legal and historical accuracy. So these are really renowned attorneys who have been involved in Supreme Court practice their entire careers, and they took time out to make sure that our materials are up to par. We also want to thank our teacher reviewers and authors. So we worked with 10 fantastic teacher author reviewers who looked at the content that was already on the site from the legacy site. We looked through that, threw some things away, spruced some things up, and added a lot of new content. And as you can see, as you go down that list, they represent all sorts of parts of the United States and different kinds of students in different schools. If you go to the actual site and go under the About button and go to site credits, you can actually read all of their bios. You can link to their bios. So here's tonight's agenda. We're going to do a couple introductory things, figure out who is in our audience tonight so we can tailor this presentation to you. I'll talk about the new features and the improved features. And then we're going to stop this PowerPoint presentation to actually go over to the site and do some clicking around the site. We'll do a short piece of a sample activity. And then I'm going to try to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A so you can ask all of your questions. If we don't have questions, we'll just be done a little early, and no teacher ever minds finishing early. And then I just have a couple things about what's new at Street Law, some things to update you on. And please feel free to have your phone out on the www.landmarkcases.org site or open another browser. I won't be insulted in the least if you are clicking around the site as I'm talking. In fact, I think it might enhance your experience if you've got another browser open looking at the site itself. And BK just dropped the address in the chat. So to participate in the webinar tonight, we have a nice small group, so I'm actually going to really encourage you to be willing to take yourself off mute and speak sometimes. You can drop things in the chat. I'm also perfectly okay with side conversations going on in the chat. If you see something and you want to know how other people use it, you're welcome to have all those kinds of conversations in the chat. Sometimes I'll ask you to use the chat box. And so, BK, can they participate? Can they take themselves off mute?
We can allow folks to take themselves off mute once they raise their hands.
Yeah, great, thank you. So thanks, and thank you to whoever made that comment so we could clarify that. And just remember when you're talking in the chat that you need to select whether or not you want the message just to go to the panelist or if you want it to go to the panelist and participants. So we'd really like to know who's here today because like I said, I'd really like to cater this and tailor it to what you want to know about landmark cases. So BK is putting up a poll that asks what kinds of subjects you teach. So if you would take a minute to take that poll, and then also if you'd like to introduce yourself in chat, put your name and your school. It's always great to see who's here. I know sometimes there are familiar faces, familiar names, and it's also good to see where people are representing what part of the country. So if you would take the poll and tell us what you teach, and then just say hi in the chat so we can see who's here, that'd be great. Someone's getting an oil change. That's great. Oh, great. All right, so we already have someone who has identified themselves as a Supreme Court Summer Institute alumni. I'm going to try to save some time then, Ron. At the end, I am going to, of course, promote the Supreme Court Summer Institute. It would be great if you'd like to say a few words about it when we get there, if you can. Great. A lot of AP government teachers, that does not surprise me at all. I'll just say a little bit about myself while we're waiting for people to chime in. Oh, great. Look at that. So everyone's high school, mostly government, and then some law elective. Great. So my background is I taught for 27 years in Fairfax County Public Schools. All of those years, AP government. I worked my way up through the college board leadership at the AP reading, and my last year at the reading, I was a question leader. I'm still writing items for the exam. And I also started the street law course, we call it Law in Action, in Fairfax County Public Schools about 15 years ago. So I'm very recently retired and kind of fresh out of the classroom. Great. Thank you to everyone who introduced yourself. It's great to see. Oh, great. Another Summer Institute alum. Yeah, and I was in the Summer Institute in 2002. That's how I first came to be affiliated with street law. Okay, we're going to ask you in the next slide to take one more poll, and that is how familiar you are with landmarkcases.org. Everything from I know it well and use it often to it's all new to me. So when the poll pops up, find the answer that's closest to you. And if you're really none of those and you want to put in chat how familiar you are with landmark cases, that's fine too. Or if you're having trouble using the polls. And this can be either familiar with the legacy site, you know, the site right before we did the relaunch, or the new site, either one. Okay, BK, and there we go. Great, so 60% of us either know it well or use it now and then. That's fantastic. And then it's new to about 40% of the people. Oh, great. So we're all over the place. I'm gonna try to play to both of those audiences then. And since we are a small group, please feel free to put in the chat if I'm going too fast, if you missed something, if you'd like me to specifically talk about something. I'm happy to do that. Oh, I see there's something in the Q&A already. Oh, it's already answered. Okay. So I'm just going to start with an overview of what is new and what is improved, and then we'll go back and we'll look at them all in a little more detail. So probably the most obvious new thing is that there are 3 new cases. Engel v. Vitale about school prayer, state-sponsored school prayer in public schools. Obergefell v. Hodges about same-sex marriage equality. and Schenck v. US about free speech. That's where we get the clear and present danger test. So I'll say just quickly, because one of the main questions I get about landmark cases is why is this case on, but this other case isn't on? So we inherited 17 cases from the previous version of landmark case from the legacy site. And those cases are all cases that come up a lot in state standards, that are in a lot of government textbooks. And then when we had the chance to select 3 new cases, we surveyed teachers who were using landmarkcases.org and asked them, which new cases do you want? And these cases came up as some of the most frequent. We also looked at, we actually, I have to say, had a grad student survey the state standards and which cases came up the most in the state standards. And some of these cases did. So Engel v. Vitale came up a lot in state standards. Obergefell hasn't yet. It's a very new case, but this was one of the cases that teachers were saying to us, we need resources to help teach this case. So it's a combination of cases that come up in a lot of standards and cases that teachers were asking for materials to help them teach. Another really big change to landmarkcases.org is the fact that now when you go to the case, you can select whether you want to see the website as a teacher view or a student view. So this happened when we were well into the revisions of this website, the pandemic hit, and teachers started to have to teach virtually or teach in hybrid ways. And so at Street Law, we said we want to make it easy, the easiest way possible for teachers to utilize the site. And the legacy site was a teacher view site. We assumed that the people coming to the site were teachers coming there to pull off information to use in their classrooms. But we wanted to make it so that teachers could also send their students directly to the site to download the activities and do them on their own and then turn them in whatever learning management system they had. So now when you go, there's a student view and a teacher view, and I'll talk about how they differ in a little bit. But hopefully that makes it easier for you to use the site in whichever way it makes the most sense in whatever variety of teaching you're doing at the moment. We're also really cognizant that people, the way that the platforms that teachers are teaching on are changing a lot, and for some people several times already this school year. One of the other things that teachers really said that they wanted in those surveys were case summaries for these cases. So if you're familiar with Street Law and our materials separate from landmark cases, you know that we have done case summaries for all the AP government cases at the high school level. And we also do case summaries for contemporary cases that are before the court right now. But we didn't have case summaries for all of these landmark cases, and we didn't have any of them at the middle school level. So we created case summaries for all cases at 2 levels, the high school level and the middle school level. And again, in a slide very shortly, I will talk to you about the differences between those 2 levels, so you could choose which one is right for your students, regardless of what grade you actually teach. And then for some select cases, we have produced some Supreme Court case packs for teaching with primary sources. Another new feature is the glossary. So as we were doing this work ourselves, we saw that sometimes we would define terms differently, even though they were the same term. And we wanted to be able to have one location where you could see the definitions for these legal terms and defined in a way that makes sense to your average 9th or 10th grader, not a law student or a lawyer. And then there were a lot of improvements to this site because the site was really great before. It just kind of needed upgraded. So the improvements are, we've really street lawized it. We took the street law case study activities that we're really known for, and we put a lot of those in. And every single case now has a classifying arguments activity. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to participate in one in just a little bit. We put a lot of primary source activities in here, both because teachers said in that survey that that's something they wanted to do, and because we know that that comes up a lot in state standards. A lot of state standards want teachers to make sure their students are being able to analyze primary sources. We added graphic organizers, and in the teacher view, we made sure that all activities are downloadable as Word and PDF files. So the Word files are very easily editable. So if you need to scaffold activities for your students, make them more challenging, maybe add some vocabulary, whatever you need to do, it's easy to do because you can download it both as a Word or as a PDF, whatever works best on your system. We also added suggestions for technology and scaffolding, again, in response to what teachers told us they needed. Teachers really wanted us to add technology lessons. We didn't do that because, as you know, as classroom teachers, technology is changing really rapidly. So a couple of years ago, Nearpod was like the coolest thing since sliced bread. And now it is Poll Everywhere and Flipgrid, and it's always changing. And not all teachers have the same access to different technology, and some technology school systems ban. And so we didn't do a lot of actually building technology, but we do have suggestions for technology. And since you can download the activities as Word files, it's pretty easy to cut and paste into all of these different kinds of platforms like Quizlet Live or all of those kinds of things. There are improved answer keys. So since a lot of you use the legacy site, I'll say that if you, in the legacy site, you had to go to the Street Law store and download a PDF. And then the questions weren't there when you went to find an answer key, just the answer. So it would just say number 1 and it would be the answer with no question. And because of that, they didn't always line up, and it was hard to grade using them. If you were a teacher and you would want to put that next to the student work, it didn't really line up. Now the answer keys are identical to the student worksheet with just the answers inserted in blue. So it makes it much easier to have it next to either, whether that's virtually, if the work is on the screen and you have another version on your other screen, or if you're actually laying papers side by side on a desk somewhere, they match completely. And last, there's a reduced reliance on external links. So when a couple years ago, we did a facelift to Landmark Cases where we changed to a different looking website. But not everything migrated very well to that new website. And, like in everything, external links break. So we really tried to take the use of external links to an absolute minimum, so that now, instead of, for instance, an activity linking you to some other website that would have a document, the document is just embedded in the worksheet. So there's a lot less clicking, and with every less click, a less chance that our link is broken.
Kathy, looks like there's a question in the Q&A.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm going to read this out loud because otherwise you're just going to be watching me read. It says, I noticed that some documents are linked on the pages and bring you directly to a doc or a PDF file to download. Others, there is a checkout process. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about this, but I'm happy to answer right now. For others, there is a checkout process to download the document. I'm assuming this is due to different practices at different times of creation. Are you seeking to move documents online for direct download versus through the checkout? So this is the answer to that question. I'm just going to put answer live. The ones that link to the Street Law store, and I'm going to talk about the store later, are ones that are our Street Law case study activities. So they are classifying arguments, applying precedents, mini moots, things like that. They're really tied, those activities are tied to the case summary. And so because of that, if we change something in the case summary, it will change that activity. So to keep those ever fresh, so that if we make a change in a case summary for any reason, it translates into those, you're going to be shifted over to the Street Law store to check those out. I will tell you a workaround when we get to the student view, teacher view for that, but that's why it's going to send you there, because then anytime we make an update to them, it's going to be reflected in those activities. The ones that are static and aren't going to get updated, unless of course someone gives us feedback that there's a huge mistake or something, those are immediately downloadable. So that's how you'll see a difference. When you look at them now, you'll see anything that is a street law case study method will take you to the store. And anything that is a more traditional sort of primary source analysis activity, read and answer activity, something like that will not. That's the distinction. Thank you, BK, for pointing that out. Okay, so when you go to the site, which we will do in a moment, but it's going to be a little easier to flow through this on the PowerPoint, you're going to see the 3 new cases added. So we have 20 total cases now. And if you haven't seen the site before, you can see sort of the breadth of these cases. Again, as old as, you know, Marbury versus Madison, and as recent as Obergefell v. Hodges. So there are the 3 new cases, and for a while they'll have a little new case in postscript to let people know. Eventually, Ben Marks, you can correct me if I'm way off here. I think we said maybe like in 6 months or something, those would fall off. But for now, we just wanted people to be aware that they are new additions. Great. So before we go to the site, I wanted to talk about the difference between the student view and the teacher view. So when you go to the student view, all of the materials are going to be PDFs. So if you want your students to have Word docs, you're going to have to download them and, you know, get them the links to those. These are the kinds of activities or the kinds of materials you're going to find. You're going to find the case summaries in both at high school and middle school level, and they'll be able to choose which one they want to access, or they can access both. Background at 3 reading levels. So we called those reading levels after, quite frankly, a lot of debate: middle school, high school, and advanced. Sometimes the lexicon levels get a little thrown off on these because there will be words that are very specific to the case, which we define, but the lexicon reading level you know, apps won't know that. So for instance, in a case like Roe v. Wade, there are going to be terms like trimester and penumbra, and we define those within the reading. So those cases, so the students will understand them, but it takes the lexicon level way up. But we kind of shoot for 8th grade, 10th grade, and 12 plus for those 3 reading levels. There are vocabulary activities at 2 different reading levels, the middle school level and then high and advanced are together. Graphic organizers, I'll show you those in a moment. The summary of the decision, key excerpts from the opinion, so whichever ones are available. So some cases, of course, only have the opinion of the court, while other cases have the majority opinion, several concurring opinions, and a dissenting opinion. So whatever is available, there will be excerpts from. The excerpts are actual excerpts from the opinion, so they're pretty difficult reading. After each one, there are some questions to help students analyze them and put them into perspective. And then, of course, there are the learning activities, the lessons themselves. And for each lesson, there are several about the case itself, about the legal issue and the facts of the case itself. And then there are several about after the case. So for most of these, for most of the cases, there's an activity that asks students to apply the precedent to a more recent case. And so I saw that when we were introducing ourselves, we have a lot of AP government teachers, and AP government teachers will know that one of the new FRQs that are required, FRQ 3, is the SCOTUS case comparison. And it asks students to do exactly that. to take a case and use it as a precedent in a later case. I think the only case that doesn't have anything like that is Obergefell, because it's just so new. Okay, so the teacher view, how does that change? How does that differ from the student view? As we've sort of already talked about, you can download both PDFs and Word docs in the teacher view. All of the materials that we just talked about are also available in the teacher view. And some of them do take you to a link to Street Law's free store. We've already talked about that. And then there are teaching strategies. So let's say you decide to do a mini moot. A mini moot is a way to do a simulation of an appellate, usually Supreme Court case argument, and to do them in small groups of 3 or 6. So let's say you found a mini moot activity, you were really excited about it, but you haven't done mini moots before. In the teacher view, it will have a link to our materials that will help you to be able to do the mini moots in your own classroom. There are planning time and activities suggestions. I'll show you some of those later. And then there are resources. So for some activities, especially the street law specific activities, we give you suggestions for differentiation and adaption, scaffolding the activities for different kinds of learners, technology suggestions, and ways to extend the activities. And then maybe most importantly to teachers, because what teacher doesn't love an answer key, the answer keys. So we kind of buried the answer keys in this teacher view. We got conflicting answers a little bit when we polled teachers about whether or not they wanted the answer keys to be directly on the site, or they wanted them to be off site somewhere where you'd have to go as a teacher to get them. And it was pretty overwhelming that teachers wanted the answers on the site itself, but they also didn't want them obvious because they wanted there to be some security from the students. So you do have to go pretty deep into the teacher view to find the answer keys. That was our compromise with how to present the answer keys. Okay, and the high school versus the middle school summary. So it's really up to you. I mean, we use these terms sort of generally, and certainly there's nothing to stop a middle school teacher from using the high school summary or vice versa. So the high school summaries we shot for a 10th grade lexicon level. Like I said, sometimes there is specific terminology that is around a case that really ups that level. So if you run a lexicon, one of the lexicon sort of apps to see, it may be elevated. But we tried to make it accessible to sort of your average 10th grader. Legal terms in the high school version, legal terms are defined within the text. So as you're reading along, if it talks about the exclusionary rule, then it would define that right in the reading. The background and legal issues are always separated. And so, for instance, in a case like Mapp v. Ohio, you would have a section that talks about the Fourth Amendment and the need for warrants and the exceptions to needing a warrant. And then you would have the details about what happened in the case of Dorley Mapp. That is so as a high school teacher, if you've already taught the Fourth Amendment and you feel like your students already have all that background, you could take out that background if you wanted to, or you can leave it in if your students still need that background. Listed separately in their own section are constitutional provisions, laws, and precedents. So students will see cases that came before that they can apply to this case. And you'll see summaries of all of the opinions, like I said before. Whatever opinion there is on this case, there'll be a summary, sometimes short, sometimes longer, of those opinions. The middle school summaries, we were shooting for about an 8th grade lexicon level. There's a glossary. So legal terms are also defined, and maybe sometimes even terms that aren't legal terms, just something that your average 8th grader might not know, is in a separate glossary. Sometimes the backgrounds and facts are combined and they're simplified. And the precedents and laws are included when important in the background and facts. They're not singled out on their own. And lastly, for almost all of them, I believe we only do a summary of the majority opinion. So the dissenting and concurring opinions aren't mentioned unless they are really important. So a few cases too, this is new. A few cases have these primary sources Supreme Court case packs. They were produced by 2 separate grants from the Teaching with Primary Sources project at the Library of Congress. 4 of those are specifically targeted at middle school students. So again, the kinds of differences is there is a glossary, and the final culminating activity for these inquiry activity is an essential question. So I don't know if we have any Maryland teachers, but these were actually developed with a grant in partnership with the Maryland Department of Education to be like your EBUS exam. So it's based on that, although I think it would be useful in other states as well, but really targeted at those skills. And then for the other ones, we're calling them high school ones, but they could be used in middle schools if you scaffold them. Certainly the primary source analysis activities are middle school accessible. The final, there is no glossary for this, however, and the final activity, inquiry-based task, is some kind of authentic task. So for instance, for Citizens United, which will be added in not too long, for Citizens United, it's whether or not we should amend the Constitution to say that the campaign finance, campaign contributions are not speech from corporations. And we do have plans in the near term to add Baker v. Carr and Citizens United v. FEC. So that's why I put that little note there. Okay, so one of the things that was in the legacy site, but we've changed it to reflect the new activities, is this planning times and activities. I'm not sure who has 4 days to teach a class, although I did see that there were some law elective teachers, and one of the beauties of teaching a law elective is that you usually have a lot of freedom as far as your scheduling. So maybe you do have 4 days, but these are just suggestions of, if you have a certain amount of time, which activities you might use. Okay, the graphic organizers. So there are 2 graphic organizers every case has. Some cases have other ones. One is how the case moved through the court system. That was on the old site as well. And that is helpful for students to see how that specific case made it to the Supreme Court. And when you look at them all together, it also is really good to help students see the many different ways, the many different paths. I think we all have in our textbooks, right? The classic dual system where you can see how a case starts in a state court and goes to the Supreme Court and the federal court, and how they all could end up at the Supreme Court. Someone just put in there, are these slides available for us to review? I certainly can make them available for you to review. Let me think about how to do that. Well, actually I have my email at the end, so you can feel free to email me and I can send you a link to these sites, to the slides. The other graphic organizer is a note catcher for the case summaries. So it's built in the exact same categories as the case summaries all are, but it would force your students to take something that's 4 or 5 pages long and make it 1 page long. This also would work for any of our case summaries. I only mention that because we do have on our Street Law store all 15 of the AP cases in case summary form. So you could also have them do this for each one of those. And it really just makes them synthesize it and pull out the most important things. And then they have the 1 pager on each case. Okay, I also wanted to mention before we click around the site a little bit that, that there are lessons that cross cases. So Marbury versus Madison, or I'm sorry, John Marshall's legacy is within Marbury versus Madison, but a couple other cases as well. And therefore, there's a lesson on the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, which is new, that spans Plessy, Brown, Regents of University of California, Vibaki, and Obergefell. And it gives students, and then some other cases as well that are not in landmark cases, but it gives them a good sort of arch on how the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause has really evolved over time. And just to give you an idea of maybe some other things that show connections between the cases, this is one of the learning activities from Obergefell v. Hodges that has students looking at this this cartoon, which can tie, you know, Brown v. Board of Education to Obergefell, because it's showing the comparison of the civil rights movement with the gay rights movement. And again, not to make everything about AP government, but that's the kind of thing that you might see on an AP government exam. The questions on the right are questions when we do our cartoon analysis or any primary source analysis. We use the basic Library of Congress teaching with primary sources system of observe, reflect, and question. And so those questions would look familiar if you're familiar with the Library of Congress teaching with primary sources tool, analysis tool. Okay, so we'll just use chat for this. I did want to show you one other document. This is one of my favorite documents, and it works for Miranda, Gideon, and Mapp. These are all Warren Court decisions, all about the rights of the accused. And so this document shows up in a couple of those cases. But this is such a great document, an actual postcard that was sent to Justice Black. From Marjorie, it's hard to see her last name, and it says, you and your cohorts should be impeached for your pro-communist, pro-criminal decisions of recent years. Because of your decision banning confessions, the admitted murderess of her 4-year-old is now free to kill again. Are you proud of your misinterpretations of the Constitution? So how might you use this document in your class to analyze this document? Does it tie into the kinds of things that you're teaching? You can just drop your answers in the chat. Or if someone wants to be brave and raise your hand, BK can take you off mute. Great. David says, examine how individuals group react to court decisions. Excellent. One of the questions that you can't see, I on purpose didn't put the questions on here, is whether or not a Chief Justice could be, or any justice could be impeached because people are reacting badly to their decisions. Not just because, you know, what does it take to actually impeach a justice? We have elected judges in Washington, so we talk about how public opinion, oh, that's great. Yeah, we are learning about checks and balances. So we look at impeaching, but from presidential standpoint, it would be interesting to my students to see impeachment in the courts. Excellent. Good to discuss the Supreme Court is not infallible. We can still evaluate decisions they make. Great, yeah. And, you know, the fact that they even have life appointments, right? So, and good behavior. So what does it mean for them not to have good behavior? Is that just that people don't like their decisions, or is that something more? Okay, we can move on. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. And we're just going to do a little clicking around the website. So I don't want to do this too much because hopefully you've been clicking in the background, but hopefully you're seeing the Landmark Cases site. I'm sure BK will tell me if that's not true.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what the site looks like, and we're going to jump to Engle v. Vitale since it's one of the new cases. I will say to you that when you first go to this site, it's going to show you the overview. In the overview, a really important excerpt from the majority opinion, which is going to be a spoiler. So if you don't want your students to know how this case comes out, if you want to ask them to do some of these activities that predict what the court decision will be, don't send them here because it's a spoiler. So here are the two views I was talking about. If you go to the student view, you can see what we were talking about. They have a choice of case summaries. They can self-select. A choice of different levels of background reading. They can self-select the two different vocabulary. The difference really between the vocabulary, if you're wondering, is the middle school vocabulary activity has the definition and ask them to put it in their own words or do a drawing. So they don't have to find a definition. The high school one asks them to define it. So they could do that from the background readings. We'll have these words. Any word that is on here will be defined in the background reading. They could go to a legal dictionary. You know, there's all sorts of different, or they could go to the street law glossary, or the Landmark Cases glossary. There are the visuals that I just showed you, the summary of the decision, and then the excerpts of the opinions. Like I said, I mean, this is not easy reading because it's actual excerpts from the opinions, but there'll be excerpts that really get to the heart of what the opinion was saying. And then there will be questions to consider that will help students to synthesize those. And then you get to the learning activities. So a lot of these cases, these activities have students doing something with the case summary. In this case, and they're applying earlier cases of West Virginia versus Barnett and McCollum versus Board of Education. And they're looking to see what do those precedents tell us about how the court might find in Engle v. Vitale, and if they were on the court, how they would apply those precedents. And then there's photograph analysis. I love this photo. It's also actually the thumbnail photo. This photo was taken the morning or the Monday after the decision came down. So this is after the court tells public schools that they can no longer have teacher-led state-sanctioned prayer. This is the picture in a Texas school. So I love that, the story behind that one. And I mentioned mini moots. So there's a case that maybe some of you are familiar with, Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe. This was a case about prayer at football games, you know, over loudspeaker, you know, bow your head in prayer, everyone saying the prayer together. And it used heavily Engle v. Vitale as a precedent. So this is a case where you could have your students argue a more recent case based on Engle v. Vitale. And then the teacher view, as I mentioned, in the teacher view, you're going to see all of the things that the students see up here. You're going to see all the learning activities, but as we discussed before, when you go to the learning activities, it's going to take you to the street law store. So that we can keep these ever fresh. So I'm going to do, just while I talk, if you make an account at the street law store, it is really, you're going to see my home address for a second. So that's probably not security wise great. But this is how long it takes to get your information, to get your, what you wanted to download. It just takes that long. It takes almost no time. And then you can download them as a PDF, as a document. And this also gives you the answers. So answers are always good. So it just takes that long. It's very short. Also for the teacher strategies, use the teacher resource strategies. So I mentioned mini moots before. If you haven't done mini moots in your class before, you can go to this site and it will give you everything, all the handouts you might need, all the directions you might need. And also for select activities, we have short videos that will show you what this activity looks like in a classroom, so that you can have that information. There is the planning time and activities that we talked about. Oh, and let me show you. Oops. So within this classifying arguments, I have to scroll the whole way to the bottom to get to the answer key. So that's where you're going to find your answer keys. On the teacher site, underneath the learning activities, I go to cartoon analysis. I can choose whether or not I want to download Word or PDF. I scroll to the very bottom, and here's my answer key that looks exactly like the student handout, but has the answers in blue. As you wouldn't be surprised, probably some answers are student answers will vary because they are about different activities. Okay, BK, we can go back to the PowerPoint since I'm running a little behind. You can click through the other new cases. I was thinking about clicking through for you, but you can do that as well. Great. Okay, so we're going to do a very, very quick classifying arguments. This is going to be easy for you. Can you go back one more slide, BK, please? So one of the new cases is Engel v. Vitale, and that case is about teacher-led state-sanctioned prayers. So the New York Regents came up with this prayer. Schools didn't have to do it, but some schools elected to do it. And when they did it, the teacher would lead the prayer that you see on the screen there. Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon thee, and we beg thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, our country, and our country. And of course, there's the language of the First Amendment with the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. So your students would have a lot more background about this. They would have the case summary up through the arguments. But then we're going to look at 4 different arguments, and you'll do what your students would try to do, although you'll be really, really good at it. It'll be a little bit harder for your students. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is an argument. We don't know which side it helps. Engel, the family, challenging the prayer as unconstitutional as an establishment of religion, or Vitale, the school board president, who says that this prayer is not a violation of the First Amendment. So this argument is the New York schools prayer is non-denominational and does not imply preference of any one religion over the others. So if you think this argument supports Engel, put 1A in the chat box. If you think it supports Vitale, put 1B and it's okay if you didn't put the 1. So David says it's Vitale, the school board president. We're getting some more B's. Good, excellent. Everyone agrees. Good, go to the next one. They're not going to need too long on these. Okay, number 2, a teacher leads the student in prayer and cooperates in carrying out the mandate requiring religious training in the public schools. This prayer is religious instruction and teachers are state officials, therefore the government is forcing a belief in organized religion. So put 2, does this help Engel or does this help Vitale? Get David first again, quick on the draw. I will say that we've done this as a poll everywhere competition where response time matters, and it's really fun because then the quicker you can come up with your response too. Okay, go to the next one. We're just going to do 2 more. Okay, and put your answer to that one. Great. And lastly, good. The New York Regents prayer is voluntary, not mandatory. Any child could remain silent or leave the room. Good. So you guys are really fast at this. Your students won't be quite as fast. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, and this is what it looks like when your students will do it. So there are actually 10 for this case, and I left out any ones that talked about the precedents because we didn't have time to talk about the precedents tonight, but you'll see that some of these reference the precedents and how the precedents have been applied. So again, if that's something that you're working with your students on, this activity can be really helpful. Okay, go to the next slide. Before we go to Q&A, I just wanted to mention that today is Pearl Harbor Day. I'm sure that you haven't missed that fact. And of course, Pearl Harbor sets up the case Korematsu v. US. And the anniversary of that case is coming up very soon on December 18th. And like all of the cases, I think we have some really extraordinary resources to teach about Korematsu. And one of the sort of culminating activities for that is to design an invitation to Fred Korematsu's Congressional Gold Medal celebration. I think it's an excellent activity. So if you're looking for something to do on the anniversary of Korematsu v. US, lots of different ideas under Korematsu. Okay, next one. Okay, so I'm gonna spend some time on Q&A. There was a question in the Q&A that I already saw that I wanted to answer, and that is about mini moots. Do we have suggestions on how to do it virtually? Yes, we do. We have a whole new web page on our website about how to adapt all sorts of different street law methods to online teaching. And you can find also a webinar about teaching at home for law electives that talks about just this. And I think that was Chris. You can also are very welcome to email me and we can set up a Zoom call or we can chat via email about how to do that. I've been in touch with a lot of teachers who have done it, and we've done it with teachers. We've done some PDs where we've had teachers do moots virtually. So I'm happy to talk to you about that. Okay, and the other question was QTF method. I don't know what that referenced. Chris, do you want to drop in the chat what you meant about that? And if anybody else has questions, I'm happy to take them. You can either raise your hand and BK will let you speak, or you can put them in the chat. I'm also going to, one of the last slides is my email. Actually, I'll drop my email now so you have time to capture it if you want to. If you think of questions later as you're clicking through, the site, please feel free to reach out and ask me. That's my job, that's what I do, and I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Okay, BK, let's move on since it doesn't seem like there are pressing questions. But if you have one, drop it in the chat, please. I wanted to mention that we would love your feedback about landmark cases and about the changes that we made. So please feel free to reach out. There's my email again. You can also email landmarkcases@streetlaw.org. It'll come to me anyway. It'll come to me and some other people. But we'd love to know if you can't find something you're looking for, if you find any errors. We uploaded, I don't know, Ben Marks can tell us, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of files. There are bound to be mistakes in there somewhere. If there are links that don't work, we would like to know all of those things. Okay, oops, yeah. Okay, so I said that I would talk about the Supreme Court Summer Institute for Teachers. We are hopeful that we might be able to have a face-to-face Summer Institute this summer. We realize that that may not be a possibility. We're gonna hold off on final judgment for a little bit to see what happens in the world. But in any case, applications are due March 15th. In a regular world, this is a 6-day in-person in DC deep dive into the Supreme Court. In years past, and hopefully again in the future, we have been in the courtroom to hear decisions handed down. We've had private receptions with a justice. We've had tours of the courtroom. Lots of scholars from legal practices, people who really involved with the cases that we study. We picked 6 cases to study in depth. And so if you're interested in this, it is quite competitive, but we would love to have some teachers from all across the country. We have scholarships available for Title I teachers from Texas and Oklahoma. If it is in person, we will have, if you do come, you do have to pay for your own travel and lodging, although lodging is heavily subsidized. But if you have questions also about the Supreme Court Summer Institute, I would be happy to answer any of those questions. This is the website that I was referencing. So we have a whole web page right now called Materials for At-Home Learning, and it takes some of our methods and gives you ideas for how you might adapt that to virtual learning. You found out about this, so you probably already follow us in some way, but if it's a great way to keep up with the kinds of things that we're doing right now. When we have new cases, we just did a webinar also on Torres v. Madrid. We were just at NCSS. We're about to put out new materials on another case, Lang v. California, and we always put those things out on social media and let people know. And last but not least, almost last but not least, another way to find out about us is to sign up for Educator updates. And so that will give you not only our newsletters that go out periodically, but also when something big happens, you might get an email blast telling you that something's in the works. Like for instance, we did a big blast when Landmark Cases relaunched just back in November. Okay, one more. Okay, so since we are actually 2 minutes early, if any of the Supreme Court Summer Institute alumni would like to say anything about the Supreme Court Summer Institute, you have 120 seconds in which to do so. Do we have any volunteers? Oh, wait, I'll read this one. Ron says, if you have not signed up or applied for the Summer Institute, it is a must. One of, if not the best PD I've ever done. Thanks for putting this together. Yeah, so I agree. I did it in 2002 and I basically stayed at an active participant in all things street law for another 17 years of teaching. And then I work here now, so yeah, great. Well, thank you all so much for coming at the end of a really long day. We really appreciate it. And again, if you have feedback about Landmark Cases, if you have any questions about where to find anything, please reach out to me and I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Thank you all. Have a good night.